Well, down here in the Sonoran Desert and in the mountains and plains of northern Arizona, the highest priority for almost 50 years was statehood.
We first, Arizona, the citizens of Arizona first started requesting statehood in the 1870s, and it continued over the next few years. The subject would come up. At the beginning, it was the Indian Wars, our notorious reputation, and then the outlawry, the Pleasant Valley War, the Cochise County War. It was a remote, very few roads out here. And it was a wild country, and a lot of it was just the perception of Arizona as a really wild place. Then, when they did, as the century was closing, we even were the first to volunteer for the Spanish-American War, and the reason being, we'll show these Americans we're ready for statehood. We'll be we deserve statehood, and. But there were others who didn't think so. Senator Bard of California said we had too many Indians and Mormons out here. Senator Albert Beveridge took a quick trip. He was the chairman of the Committee on Territories. He took a fast blink trip out here and decided this place is. I think he thought maybe I'm paraphrasing, but he said all it's got out here is rattlesnakes and scorpions and Mexicans and Mormons and Democrats.
The real question, as we look back on 1910, is why did Congress finally decide to let us start the process for statehood? I mean, after all, the White House, the Congress, the U.S. Senate were controlled by the Republicans. Arizona Territory was mostly with the Democrats. Why would they allow a new Democrat state? Well, to some extent, it had to do with Arizona's lobbying effort. A territory has no U.S. senator, but gets to elect one member of Congress, technically called a delegate. That person can vote in committee meetings, but not on the floor of the House. In our case, over those 49 years, the Arizona delegate's main job was to lobby for statehood. You might think that Democrat Arizona would have always elected a Democrat to that position. Not so. At various times, there were also independents. There was something called the Unionist Party, and there were Republicans. Our final delegate from 1909 to 1912 was named Ralph Cameron, a Republican who was well connected with the Washington leadership. It is said he was particularly close with Senator Albert Beveridge of Indiana, the chairman of the key committee. Maybe Cameron was persuasive. Maybe friendship prevailed. Other suggestions are that Democrat Arizona was balanced by the admission of the more Republican New Mexico, and that Senator Beveridge wanted to have a big say in the requirements outlined in the Arizona Enabling Act. All right, so what is the Enabling Act? Basically, it is an act of Congress that says you can write a proposed state constitution, which we will later approve or disapprove, depending on what you write. The federal government paid for this effort. The Department of Interior put up $100,000 to cover the cost of the election of delegates and to pay salaries of those delegates and their staff. They had 60 days to complete the task. Alice Duckworth of the Arizona State Library often lectures on the subject. We spoke with her in the original historic legislative chamber, the very room in which the Constitutional Convention held its meetings. It's important to realize that in the Enabling Act, Congress built in a set of instructions listing numerous things that the proposed Constitution must include and other things that it must not include.
For one, it had to be Republican or representative in nature. Two, we could not make any laws that discriminated on the race or color, and we could not make laws that discriminated against religion, and so those had to be in. The Indian lands, the reservations, we could not make any laws regarding the reservations. However, we had to have laws that said no selling of liquor to the Indians. we were just coming out of the polygamous plural marriages of the Mormon Church tradition, and so that was also a strict no plural marriages. English would be the official language, and that was in there. The new state would pick up all debts belonging to the territory. We couldn't just write them off. And if, for example, Indian lands were sold to an outside entity, that no liquor law would remain in place for 25 years. The Enabling Act required that office holders in Arizona be able to read and write and be able to function in their office without the use of an interpreter. The state capital will be in Phoenix, and it will remain there until at least 1925 before we can move it. Oh, let's see what else. Oh, yes, loans from the federal government, such as the one that built Roosevelt Dam, will remain as part of the debts of Arizona. And let's see what else. Oh, yeah. None of the provisions in the Enabling Act can be changed by the state of Arizona. They only can be changed by the U.S. Congress. The vast majority of the Enabling Act for Arizona deals with public lands, as in lands granted by the Congress to Arizona for the purpose of supporting things like schools, prisons. It just is, it's vast. It's hundreds and thousands and acres, and reading it is complicated. It just makes your mind spin. But the basic purpose was to make sure that Arizona had a way to support public education, had a way to support the prisons and whatnot. And it's really, how to say, it's convoluted. When you go to read it, it's moments of excitement in the midst of numbing legalese. But the basic thing is that Congress didn't set us out here and not give us means to support the agencies and schools and whatnot that Arizona would need at the time of the Constitution Convention and later.
Remember, this was in June of 1910. The next general election would have been held in November of that year. But Congress included the requirement that the sitting territorial legislature, which had been elected in 1908, would simply stay in office until statehood came. It was presumed that statehood would come in 1911, and Arizona would then elect a state legislature. Someone in Congress apparently got the idea that somehow we might end up in a 1911 situation with both a territorial and state legislature at the same time. They dealt with their worry by dictating that there could be no session of the territorial legislature at all in 1911, and there wasn't. I've often joked that the legislature of 1911, which passed no laws, raised no taxes, and never even met, was the best darn legislature we ever had.